Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first presentation in the NEST 2021 Distinguished Speakers series. I acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. And now it's a pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Umit Kiziltan. Since 2019, Umit has been the Chief Data Officer at Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Between 2011 and 2019, he was the Director General of the Research and Evaluation Branch at IRCC, focusing on the development and liberation of research data in close partnership with Statistics Canada. Before that, between 2006 and 2011, Umit was also a public servant executive in resettlement, multiculturalism, and citizenship. And I should also mention that prior to 2006, Umit taught in academia, and he worked with civil society and First Nations in international development and on advancing Indigenous control of Indigenous education. He's currently preoccupied with the increasing fragility of liberal democracies, which fuels his commitment to quality data and trusted insight to inform public policy and evidence-based narratives. Since I've known Umit, I think since probably 2011, maybe before that, he's always been dedicated to thinking about having good quality data that we can use to inform policy decisions. And today he'll be talking about that, from data to policy relevant insight. Umit's indicated that he's happy to take questions about points of clarification throughout his talk, but otherwise please wait until after, during the Q&A period after his presentation to answer more substantive questions. So over to you, Umit.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you're hearing me okay. Good afternoon and bon après-midi tout le monde. Merci infiniment de votre invitation. Ma présentation sera en anglais, mais soyez à l'aise, s'il vous plaît, de poser vos questions ou faire vos commentaires dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. This is wonderful, wonderful meaning, speaking to people who care about data and, of course, the use of data. It's not an opportunity that I get very often. So before we start, I would like to also acknowledge that my home and our offices here in Ottawa are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here in this region reaches back to time immemorial. Also, as you all know, as we live in extremely unusual times, I also would like to acknowledge that, yes, to some degree, we are all in the same boat, so to speak, but it's also important to recognize that some of us are more privileged, while others are at much higher risk in these difficult times. So I would like to thank all those who we depend on for our health, livelihood, and sanity in these difficult times. Little bit scope and focus. The title is correct. The little description of what I'm going to talk is correct. I'm not sure about the distinguished part, but the rest of the poster is pretty accurate. So I would like to speak to you today about how in Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, IRCC short, we have mobilized administrative data in support of department's mandate. In a nutshell, there is that little story. And for those who may not be directly interested in immigration, I'd like to assure you that it's still an interesting story in the sense that my deeper intention is to unpack and perhaps demystify, to the degree I can, how data works from within federal public service. Because public service generates a lot of data, important data, and it's important to some degree understand, if I can help with you understanding that, I'll be definitely pleased. A quick footnote, as as it was said, I'm relatively recent in public service, And I've always experienced it from outside as a black box, hard to understand, hard to decipher. So in that respect, I think, I hope what I'm going to share you're going to find it valuable. So my story, in a sense, is one of data transformation, data liberation, if you will, by design, not by accident, I can assure you, from the start, and ultimately aiming to provide a ready and secure access to policy relevant quality data, to the degree possible, disaggregated data, as it is very popular these days. As you know, COVID all of a sudden woke up the entire country that there is not enough disaggregated data for researchers and analysts, both internal to public service, but also external in academia and other places. And that's very important to underline, because oftentimes you will see also in a few minutes, efforts in public service, public organizations primarily are directed to internal use. And I think we have begun and we have demonstrated that we are breaking that rule. So put differently, this is also the story of chasing a dream, of kind of vision of sorts, to have more qualified eyes on more quality data. We kind of sometimes use that little moniker, like more qualified eyes on more quality data. Well, why? Well, for greater public good. You might call it inclusive, equitable policies, better programs. However you end up defining public good, that's how we give a mission to what we are trying to do. So that's the story of that. So ultimately, if I can help you leave this conversation this afternoon with a better understanding and appreciation of the challenges and the opportunities involved in paving that path, that I think I need to turn off my speaker, but I'm not sure if you're hearing some noise. I'm getting it, but okay. So the paving that path from data to insight, and that's looks like a very short path. Here is data, here is insight, but it's not like that. It's a very complicated path. So if I could give you a sense of challenges and opportunities involved in paving that, and maybe sometimes repaving it, to tell you the truth, that path, rendering it secure and reliable, if you will, and also open to public. It's not my path. It's not, a personal private path. It's got to be a public path, so that we can move from data to that insight that we all care about. So if you want, if I can do that, I'm happy. If you find the story also exciting and stimulating enough that you will have some really interesting, tough questions for me, then I would be even happier. So first, the context, very quickly. And context is very important in the sense that, because context oftentimes drives, but also limits. It gives us a lot of drivers, but also it constrains us. So better to understand how and from within what type of a space we work. So evidence-based policy has long been, as you may know, in the public service discourse. And sometimes also in times of low public trust, I would say it gives room to a tongue-in-cheek version of policy-based evidence. Sometimes people talk of that sort, like basically you have a policy idea, you concoct some kind of evidence, you make it look like it's scientific. But that's not what I'm talking about here, obviously. So luckily, in my opinion, relatively speaking, the right context, the window of opportunity, public servants call it, has been emerging in Canada for quite some time to help us pave that way, that path, if you will, from data to policy relevant insight. Now, within the government of Canada, there are a number of policy developments ranging back to about maybe 7, 6, 8, 10 years ago, and also coming all the way today to present times, that enable us to work on data with quite force, if you will, some decent force. So the most recent one, obviously, in COVID-19, that gave you a sense of, it shows everybody, reminded us, I would say, some people were seeing it for the first time, that data matters, and it enables leaders to see sooner and act faster and wiser. This is almost word by word, chief statistician, one of his presentations, and also that data can save lives. We've learned and got reminded about this. And it's also the fact that it's not neutral, that it reflects our biases. This is very important to keep in mind. And COVID showed us all these things, and still showing, I think. And a couple other elements inside the Government of Canada policy space. Definitely, in terms of evidence-based decision-making, one of the key policy developments was 2016. There was a policy, brand new policy came into being. It's called Policy on Results. It brought a lot of attention to actually the purpose and mission of public service, ranging from public service, providing service to clients, all the way to policy results and outcomes. And that particular policy has been making, has been a great driver, if you will, in terms of our work on data. Similarly, the focus on digital. You may have been hearing about digital government. We have a minister. There are digital in every corner you look at these days in the public discourse. And Treasury Board policy, directive, guidelines. There is a tons of work coming out in that, and that helps us as well and guides us. Sometimes confusing, but it helps. Another big development inside the public space, public service space, is the artificial intelligence, advanced analytics. As you know, the big data, as it explodes, the use of new methodologies, and the government trying to respond to that with a number of guiding principles, how to do algorithmic impact assessment and whatnot. All these documents, you can obviously find them in the public Treasury Board Secretariat website. One more piece to register also as another kind of a context piece is 2019, 18-19, Government of Canada for the very first time issued a data strategy roadmap. Something of that sort had never existed. Not many people paid attention to data in that sense. And this particular Canada data strategy roadmap has paved the road basically for all federal departments and agencies to provide a dedicated attention to data. So these are all on the kind of very positive side of things. There are, of course, some limitations with them, but we will talk about those. Another quick kind of a reference is to the mandate letters. I don't know how many of you, it's very important for us. Whether you pay attention to them, I don't know. But the mandate letters, take a look at them always. That gives you a sense of what the Prime Minister is asking from his ministers, but also at the same time sets the tone. So when you look at the mandate letters, there are, of course, statements like, you know, we remain committed to evidence-based decision-making. If you take it seriously, it means a lot. It means a lot that the mandate letter is saying that we got to take into consideration the impacts of our policies on Canadians. Why is this important? Well, if you really care about impacts, you got to have data. You got to have real solid data to measure those impacts, to study those impacts. So those are in IRCC. There are statements in our ministers, of course, mandate letter as well, having to do with evidence-based decision-making, working on settlement outcomes, measuring settlement outcomes, a number of key statements. In IRCC, specifically in our department, in terms of our context, in terms of what matters, IRCC for a few years ago developed a results framework. If you haven't seen it, take a look at it. It's, if you care about immigration. Why it matters is that in this results framework, there are basically 8 results statements, and they are all important in the sense that take them as the department's promise to the Canadian public as to what it is, why it's raison d'etre, if you will, why it exists. Right? It covers areas such as a promise of generating economic benefits, all the way to ensuring that the immigrants and refugees achieve economic independence, that they feel part and belonging to Canada, and on and on. Why it matters? Because these statements, they are the ones that the department is bound in terms of its accountability to test and demonstrate that it is realizing these goals, if you will. And you're not going to be able to do that if you want to do a proper job. You can maybe blah, blah, you can try to get away, but these days everybody's very smart. People are watching. You need to have solid evidence to account for the public funds that you're spending as a department. And this is not only just for my department, this is true for all departments. So in a sense, Canadians are lucky in terms of that relationship with their public service. And the IRCC also has, in addition to these goals and whatnot, a number of programs, 12 programs, many sub-programs, business lines ranging from seasonal agriculture workers to international mobility program, international students having postgraduate work permits. These are all business lines. And every single business line, every single business activity also has promises made, also has certain goals, and they need data both they need evidence and insight, obviously, but there needs to be a data infrastructure to enable these programs and business lines to develop their frameworks, establish their own objectives, and then, of course, monitor and figure out whether they are delivering what they have promised. So now what I'd say is that enough for context, and let's just move and start from the beginning. This is, I guess it's always smart to start from the beginning. Assuming a little bit of Alison, but I help you a little bit understand what IRCC is about. But to add to that a little bit is that IRCC historically, its own data source, it generates data as a department. All departments, I think, to some extent, but they all have different, of course, if you are in Natural Resource Canada, you work with different type of data than in IRCC. But IRCC, its main source of data has been what we call administrative data. And administrative data is collected and used primarily, if not exclusively, at the start for operational decision making. So simply put, we process applications from applicants, permanent, temporary. It could be a visa application. It could be a citizenship application, passport application. We receive these applications. That's data for us. And then, of course, we action them. And as we action, make decisions. All those decisions are also part of the data landscape. So this data contains crucial, as you can already anticipate, sociodemographic client information. I hope I'm not losing you, but things such as from birth date to citizenship, source country, where you're coming from, family formation, official languages, how much do you speak, blah, blah, education level. They come to us as part of they make part of our data landscape, if you will. But as you will anticipate, this admin data by its nature has a lot of quality issues. Why? Because it may be very good and sufficient for the officer to make his or her decisions on that file. But anything beyond that, that data, because it's not collected for research or analytical or reporting purposes, is not really at that stage ready to be used for other purposes. So you can assume that that data it is generated in the kind of front lines, if you will, at the client interface, is in its raw form, it cannot be used for many other purposes. So naturally, given the above kind of contextual factors that I just mentioned, and the growing interest in admin data beyond its immediate use, we had to do something. When I say we had to do something, a quick clarification, I started working on this in 2011. Of course, a very quick reminder to everybody, I think this is the same thing for all of you, I'm gonna venture to guess, is we all stand on the shoulders of other giants. Sometimes people pretend as if they have created the world. That's not the case. So same thing with me. When I started working on this, of course, there were many other people incredibly brilliant, more brilliant than I am in terms of their smarts and care. And it's their work that I took over. But something had to be done if you were serious about using IRCC data. So the objective is secure quality data fit for use for the purpose defined. So we have already collected data, let's say in the department, but we haven't done anything much to it yet. So therefore, we have to do something to that data to get it ready for other purposes. Well, what kind of purposes are they? Well, there are purposes internal and external. So before it could get to you, for you to be able to work with it. So generally speaking, the main purposes with that data, obviously at the initial stage, is for decision making, as I explained to you. So you want to make decisions on the files, you want to have dashboarding, you want to know Am I doing enough processing? That type of a kind of an operational lens, if you will. But also you want to have policy relevant evidence, obviously. So you'd like that data to serve that purpose. Another very important purpose is the transparency. You want to be able to report back to the public as to all those promises that you have made. Are you achieving those results? You know, are those immigrants and the refugees that you have welcomed, how are they doing? Because you made already a promise. So you need that type of a data. And of course, at the end, also another key purpose is the client experience. Is the public interfacing with the department, getting their money's worth, if you will, what they deserve in terms of a citizen or even to be citizen interacting with the department. So all those different purposes, you need to do something to that initial data that I just mentioned, and there is tons of it, to tell you the truth, if you put many years. So what do we do to it? How do we work with that data? The main, we call it transformation of the data, but the admin data, we transform it and we develop it. What do I mean by that? It's not very complicated. Of course, you know, in the bowels of the data world, it is complicated, but so we access that data and then we clean it. So we clean it, meaning you have to do a lot of quality assurance, quality work, establish standards. If there are 5 different ways of, you know, naming a country, you have to, you know, come to standards. The fields, you have to kind of make sure that they are all aligned and they make sense. If necessary, you got to impute missing values. So basically, you transform that data. Another key element of transforming data in the IRCC world, you probably don't, of course, feel this. Imagine that initial data, when it comes into the IRCC, is not only it's operational, administrative, but also it's document-based. So there's a document that comes in, gives you certain fields, you take those, and then there are decisions. But what we need is a person-based data. So in that big transformation that I'm talking about is we transform that data into a person-based data. So all the information actually collects around an individual in that second phase as we touch it, if you will. What that does is I invite you kind of use your imagination, start thinking about the following. Think of an international student who comes to Canada, applications, processing, everything is good, going to school. So we have captured his or her data, and then that person becomes gets a work permit and is working, right? So now actually is a temporary postgraduate work permit, and he or she is working. We are capturing that data as well, and then conditions are such that applies for a refugee, becomes a refugee claimant, files a refugee claim, and that data is being captured by the system. Okay. And then at the end, successful becomes a permanent resident, and then a few years later becomes a citizen. Now think of that continuum. The original data system that I just mentioned is not set up to treat that person as an individual. It looks business lines and it collects the data in such a way that actually the database, the original operational database, is unable to connect. So our transformation actually creates this continuum so that we can prepare and massage that data. And I will come to it. You might say, well, why to go through all this trouble? I will explain in a second. There is a purpose and reason beyond that. So part of our transformation is that. Another transformation that we were successful to do a few years ago. It's not very easy maybe for you to understand why this is so revolutionary. But in a department like IRCC, which is huge, about 9,000 employees these days, we were able for the first time to create a data system, data collection system, and Vicky knows this very well, Yoko too, a data system to collect data, complex data system, not for the purpose of operational decision making. For the first time, it was a brand new data system that was built to collect data for performance measurement. This is luxury in public service. It's a very complex data system. Some of you would know, I hope. We call it iCare short. For basically, it's a system that collects data on the settlement service use of settlement clients. About more than 100,000 a year. You receive services in unique individuals from over 500 service provider organizations. I'm sure in London as well. And all of their experience enter into this database, from needs assessment to the first level of their English or French class, as they progress, all that is captured. This system does not collect none of that. If tomorrow we stop collecting that data, IRCC business can still continue. Will have no impact on IRCC business. However, it'll have huge impact on IRCC being able to tell its story or not. All those other commitments from the context that I just gave you. So this was another part of our larger kind of a revolutionary transformation of our data landscape, if you will. So let me just move this little, I am okay on time wise. So how did we use this newly transformed person-based data? Very quick question, just to remind ourselves and also test your memory, see how many of you have been in this field a long time. So one of the first uses of this data, and remember, so far I'm inside IRCC. I haven't gone anywhere else. I'm going to take you to some other places. That's why I'm reminding you. So the first use of this data, cleaned up and nicely packaged, if you will, was to develop a robust statistical reporting capacity. This in the department happened, this is before my time, around 2005, 6, perhaps 7. By that, remember that person-based data. Now, based on that, just like StatsCan does it, we were able to build a statistical reporting capacity. Some of you would remember, I hope, Facts and Figures. This was an annual publication. There was no open data portal at that time. So we were packaging it and giving you every year a lot of volumes information, volumes of how many people came, of what category and whatnot. But also we were able to give you temporary resident to permanent resident transition numbers. How many of them from what category transition to permanent residence? Thanks to that continuum that I just described a few minutes ago. So this was the first value added or value that we got out of that whole transformation, if you will. But at the same time, if you remember those drivers, and you could already imagine, I think where I'm going with this, is that that data in itself within IRCC, even with iCare, which is a good addition, has got fundamental analytical limitations. You cannot say too much with that data. I mean, primarily, you cannot say, for instance, how are the immigrants and refugees doing in Canada with that data? You can only tell, their education level at entry. That's it, nothing else, right? Or you can, of course, you can report back to the public how many immigrants and refugees in which category were admitted to Canada. That we were able to do, and that was good success, but not enough. Not enough if you are hungry for insight. Not enough if you are hungry, if you have a hungry mind, if you will, to tell more important stories or to inquire into whether people are left behind, if you will, or what is the poverty level or incidence of poverty or incidence of underemployment in immigrant populations who are landing in Canada. You couldn't tell all that with that data that I just described, and I kind of, so nicely, I kind of tried to say how beautiful that was, but that's not enough. So knowing those limitations, what did we do? And by the way, like I'm telling this story, but at the same time, trust me, the same challenges is valid for all departments who have precious admin data. So don't think that I'm just giving you a kind of a very narrow story. We'll come to that in a second. And please, as Vicky reminded, at any time, if I'm losing you, just do some kind of sign and stop me so I can explain if there is a need for clarity. So the major step in our data transformation actually came with what we call external data linkages. Some of you know this really well, obviously, but I need to explain what that means. So we knew from the beginning the potential added value of our data lied in linkages with external databases. And that's where the first partner that we had is Statistics Canada. And so with their expertise, commitment to research data, and we were maybe the very first ever federal department working with them towards creating new data assets by bringing data together, different data together. So, and we worked in their secure environment with their expertise, a lot of investment in this. And this work started a few years before my time. And the initial seeds of this major flagship database were created at that time. We call it IMDb short. It's a longitudinal immigration database. And we started back in early 2000s, mid 2000s perhaps, linking the tax filers data imagine, for those who are not familiar with the story that I'm telling you, the entire tax filers in Canada being able to take that data from CRA and being able to link it with immigrants database. At that time, it was back to 1980. Now it's actually 1952, believe it or not. The entire immigrant population, by immigrant, I mean, originally it was only PR. Now it's PR and TR. TR meaning temporary residence. So you have almost full census of all immigrants alive today in Canada whose tax files have been linked to, so you can identify their earnings, employment insurance, social assistance throughout the years, right? It's a longitudinal. Of course, I'm not talking about here, just to clarify, unless, just in case if somebody is getting panicking, you know, do they know how much I made last year? That's not the case. We're not looking at names, we're looking at groups, right? We're looking at cohorts. So just to rest you, put you to ease. So in the last 7 years, we have expanded IMDb now to include 12 million immigrants, as I said, covering 1952 to 2018, almost a near census. Not only that though, but we have also added a number of markers so that you can identify not only TRs in that whole database, citizenship uptake, those who have become citizens. You can analyze them separately versus their cohorts, same counterparts who have not become citizens. Express entry is identifiable. Syrian refugees, you can go into the database and you can look at actually the Syrian refugees as a group, and you can follow them over the years, right? So these are all, now another element that we have done, now I'm talking to you about a little bit of how do we enrichen, if you will, this data asset. Tax filers, not everybody files taxes, especially temporary residents, temporary work permit holders. The rates are not that high. So what we were looking for, and also the other thing is also filing tax, it puts a huge time gap. By the time the taxes are filed, it takes almost about 2 years. I was just telling Vicky, on February 1st, we will have 2018 IMDb available, meaning 2018 tax information will be available in the IMDb for you to look at from 2018 back. However, few weeks after that, we will have another addition to the file, which is a T4s. These are the earnings. You don't have to file a tax, but all employers, as they issue a T4, that data, few years ago, 2 years ago, we were able to link it to IMDb in such a way that you can analyze not only PRs, but also temporary foreign workers who have received an earning from an employer, any employer in Canada. So we have been able to do this for about 2 years now. So what this means is that you can analyze seasonal agricultural workers, their earnings. You can see in terms of which region they are receiving, where they are working. You can look at refugee claimants for the first time. We've always known in the temporary population who had a work permit, but we never knew whether they worked, you couldn't, or how much they made. But now you are able to do that. Now, why is this important? I can only, if you're not excited about this potential, I cannot give you that excitement. But in terms of the analytical capacity, this is huge compared to what we had before. So another significant emerging also administrative data linkage as a new data asset has been what we call CED, Canadian Employer-Employee Dynamic Database. This is a database on its own. It captures all businesses in Canada, and it has data about who owns it, who works there. These are names, right? And everything that you want to know about that business in terms of how much they make, when it was founded, when it ceases to exist, industry, all that information. So this particular core database, last almost 5 years, we have been investing in this, and we have been able to link it both to TR and PR, permanent residents and temporary residents. What this database does now, and there have been incredible amount of research, not enough, that's where I'm talking to you. More people have to get their hands on this database. But a lot of work has been happening on, there is one study that I'm looking at right now, immigration and firm productivity, for instance, evidence from CED by leading scholars. looking at basically as the database allows for a better understanding of immigrants' role in terms of entrepreneurship. Who's creating business? And you find out that actually all types of refugees create different businesses. In what industry? Well, in transportation. Well, maybe they are driving cabs, or in food sectors. So you can see in terms of their income, obviously, is there as well. Concentration within sectors or contribution to Canadian productivity, all as part of that analytical capacity. So now I'm going to stop there for a second, turn around and tell you another kind of a big potential that we discovered and we used is the surveys, right? So remember now on the path that I'm talking about, I remember the IRCC data that we kind of, cleaned it up. Then we went out and linked with two major, if you will, and more than two actually, administrative. Now we looked at surveys. Among the surveys, what is the top survey that we all care about most is the census, right? So in 2011, actually, we did a first pilot. And now 2016 census finalized it. Basically, what it means is that we were able to link our immigration databases with the census. This, again, you got to use your imagination. The census provides key information on visible minority, generational status, birth, religion, and now they're all actually linked with immigration categories. So basically, for the first time, there have been studies using the 2016 census overlaying poverty or income level zones in cities with immigration category distribution of immigrants by source country, by cohort, and looking at home ownership. You can looking at all number of different factors that weren't available before. There's one study that I know of, Naomi Lightman's study on spaces and places of exclusion, mapping rental housing disparities for Toronto's racialized and immigrant communities. She used, she's a scholar in Calgary. She's from York originally. She used, again, this database, this linked database. And I think census is going to prove more and more relevant, especially given a lot of attention on disaggregated data. Racialized, racial, I mean, we don't use race indicators, but we use VisMin. VisMin is there. As you look at it, you can tell a number of studies, especially as they are intersected with immigration category data. That wasn't enough. We also went after other surveys, CCHS. Now, if you can cover the economic side of things with IMDb and SEED and whatnot, T4s, you also need information around social, right? And cultural. You remember that belonging and integration, is it working? So CCHS actually provides us both, Canadian Community Health Survey, by the way, provides both health and belonging, kind of holds the pulse, if you will, of Canadians. So in that respect, that linkage has proven very useful. There have been quite a few studies on that. General social survey, similarly. We even actually StatsCan thought of this. We never thought about that, but some of you would remember LSIC, Longitudinal Survey of Immigrants to Canada, done many years ago. But we even linked IMDb to that survey, by which enabled us a follow-through analysis of people who have taken the survey and had given already certain indications in terms of their mental state and where they are in terms of their early integration. Now we are able to look at, and in a disaggregate fashion, these populations about 15, 20 years later as to how they are doing in terms of their economic outcomes. So the survey space is very important. Two more kind of incomplete projects. One of them is, remember that iCare that I just mentioned, the performance information data collection system. What we did also, we have integrated IMDb with iCare. That data is at StatsCan. It hasn't been accessed yet. It's in a pilot. I think Western is there as well. There is a study looking at, there are 14 studies. If the pilot comes out okay, that particular linked brand new data asset will also be available. Again, your imagination needs to kind of kick in here. you will be able to look at in terms of settlement service usage versus non-settlement service, because there are also non-users that are available in IMDb, and you can do a number of different studies comparing those populations, basically eventually getting at whether we are getting a value out of these settlement services or not. We are also working another one incomplete study, a linkage, which is labor force survey. Currently, labor force survey, I don't know if any one of you has participated in it, but when they call you, they ask you whether you were born in Canada or outside of Canada. They capture whether you're an immigrant or not. So current LFS reports, which is a very important survey, obviously, they do capture immigrants, gender, and they also capture through the interview whether when you arrived, and so therefore cohort is there. However, we have been working for the last couple of years on linking LFS, actually the survey, to the permanent resident file. What it means is that when you do the survey, you don't have to ask any of those questions. Once you get the person's name, that name already will find itself in the immigration database, and therefore we will know not only whether that person is immigrant, but the system will also know their immigration category, when they came, and their original initial characteristics, and therefore the analysis, the capacity basically amplifies many folds, if you will. So not done yet, but we are moving on that in that path. So now this is not even the most interesting part of the story, all these linkages, because what is it good for if all this data sits in StatScan, right? So the path, as I said, from data to insight is not going to be public for sure, even if it is a good one and solid one, and it won't create all that necessary value. So the above mentioned all the quality and highly policy and relevant data, if it were to be left to its natural historical destiny, if you were kind of, then they would stay what Global Mail calls data jails, right? Only the public servants get at them, and they work with it, and no, external eyes. As I said, that wouldn't really actualize the more talented eyes on more data wouldn't happen. So therefore, we started working on a solution, and in the spirit of open government, open policy, we began to invest talent and money, if you will, and worked on getting our data, both internal and the ones linked with StatScan, gradually, starting about 2015, moving them first to the Federal Research Data Center, which is in Ottawa. And then after that, with the full intention, moving it to what we call, and I hear that it's right across from Vicky's office, Canadian Research Centers. There is about, I think, more than 30 across Canada. I hope that some of you are familiar with it. And there's one in obviously Western. And we built a strong partnership with Canadian Research Data Centers Network. It's one of the maybe Canada's best kept secrets, in my opinion. This network, it's volunteers, highly talented board runs it, and they are the ones who partner with StatScan and make it possible for all these centers, together with the universities, very important, universities invest a lot of money in this, and they create these research centers where basically you have direct access to microdata. I mean, this is like a sine qua non, like if it didn't exist, there is no way a quality research would happen. Remember at the very beginning, I said that administrative data that gets collected for decades in IRCC would have no value, if you will, in terms of its analytical power if the RDCs did not exist. So with StatScan expertise, we have worked on this, and basically our data, most of our data, what I've described, with some exceptions, few, and we are resolving them, they are now across Canada, over 32 research data centers. And I understand, I think in RDCs, there are over 40 projects from Western right now working on immigration, some of those data that I just mentioned. But the story gets better. I have another, so story gets better in the sense that StatScan doesn't have all the data that we need, that you need. It's actually the provinces who have very precious data that they don't necessarily send to StatScan. Some have begun, but not necessarily. So what am I talking about here? Health data, right? Social services, education, right? There's all types of data in provincial holdings that do not find themselves in StatScan. If they were, then we could do linkages in StatScan and amplify our data assets even faster. So what we have done is, again, going back to, looks like the 2011 is a magic year. In 2011, we built a initial first data partnership with ICES. It's an institute in Ontario, arm's length. It's Ontario's actually data institute. Holds, I'm not sure exactly, but practically all kinds of Ontario data. And over 80 provincial health registries I hear they have, and demographics, health services, health service providers, disease, your OHIP is there, my OHIP is there, like all that stuff is in there. So what we did is, initially we gave our data to them. So we couldn't receive it, but we gave our data, or initially permanent resident PR, then TR. So they have our entire data that gets refreshed every year longitudinally in ICES. And ICES with this data have been pumping out incredible amount of, originally mostly epidemiological, but now recently a lot of integration settlement studies coming out of ICES. One of the very recent one is just a few months ago. It's called COVID-19 in Immigrants, Refugees, and Other Newcomers in Ontario. Characteristics of those tested and those confirmed positive. Incredible comparison, a lot of granularity, because they have all the categories, they have gender, they have source country, and they can tell the story in terms of differential outcomes, if you will, or outputs of these tests. There is so much more to say, but I'm gonna try to kind of cut it a little short so we can have a conversation. We have done the similar data partnership with British Columbia, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. They are all completed. They have received our data, and BC has been already publishing. Manitoba and New Brunswick new, and they have quite a few projects on the go. And our next step on this whole provincial domain, there's an organization that I just discovered. It's kind of very bad to say. It's called Health Data Research Network Canada, HDRNC. And they are trying to establish pan-Canadian interprovincial health data networking. They're not going to collect all the data from all provinces, no, but they're going to create ways to run the same type of study that you would like to do in all provinces at the same time. Yes, the data is not interoperable, but you will be able to actually conduct comparative studies interprovincial. So we're trying to right now, working with them, see if we can get our data actually linked so that we can have comparative immigration data also across. Few more ideas very quickly. All these new assets, just in case if there are some limitations, we also work on limitations, meaning, you have certain projects, academics especially, that they can't get done with what I have described. So we also facilitate surveys. So we work with academics because we have the address database of immigrants of any kind, group, source country, or category. So we launch the survey. Survey response doesn't come to us. It goes to the academic or the researcher. We work with Atar Akbari, St. Mary's, Thomas Sowell, McGill, various other researchers. So this is another way of paving that path, as I said, so that we can land with those trusted studies, if you will. We also facilitate researchers' entry to Federal Research Data Center. Why? Because there is some data, as I said, that is not available at RDCs. So we work with Stanford University for them to do machine learning study on using AI methodologies on some of our data sets. We work with Besma Momani from Waterloo and other folks as well. And also we work with customized data products so that people have certain data tables that they want to run. They come to us and we run those data and we provide it to the researcher. Somebody just the other day, I was looking at the requests, asking a doctoral candidate, I think, asking for a breakdown of international mobility program work permit holders by closed and open work permit. They needed this data. They looked at the open data portal. They couldn't find it there. I skipped the Open Data Portal section, but Open Data Portal is jam-packed with a lot of information. Don't ignore it. it is a very preliminary, maybe static tables, but it still has a lot of value. So as people cannot find their way in that path, they can also come to us directly, and we work with them to get their hands on what they need, if you will. Couple of concluding thoughts before I stop. Number one, just to remind us, remind ourselves all together. So administrative data, don't dismiss it. There was a time, I know maybe Vicky as well is a good surveyor. She does a lot of surveys. As Statistics Canada started slowing down on surveys, sometimes to cut cost, but also to mobilize the value of admin data. There was a switch in the last, say, 7-8 years in Canada and also around the world. So people were kind of very dismissive at the beginning of administrative data. But as I try to describe to you, if it is done right, administrative data actually can serve as the seeds of some powerful potential data assets that can deliver that insight that we are all after. It takes time, it takes partnerships, and there is no doubt that it'll bring value at the end. Second thought, again, concluding thought, we haven't discussed here. We could have, but maybe on a different time, I kind of hinted at it, this whole new big data environment that we are in, right? The Internet of Things, collecting data, social media, data everywhere, that's also relevant. And it's got potential, it's got power for informing policy. Data scientists galore everywhere, people talk about them, machine learning and whatnot, the digital government. So this is, how shall I say, this is so important in terms of its potential, but at the same time, obviously the government already is aware of its threats and risks as well, right? So that's why you will hear when you go Treasury Board Secretariat website, and you look at the policies, you will start seeing responsible use, ethical use of artificial intelligence, for instance. So I lost my file here for a second. Yes, I got it. So in terms of algorithmic bias when you're doing AI or looking at automated decision making, if you were to tomorrow automate decision making in public service, what would that mean for clients, right? So these are all issues that the public service is discussing very actively, and any movement, if you will, in this kind of a path of use of data is going to have to be done very carefully. And Statistics Canada is very adamant on ethics as they apply to use of, especially, well, to all data for sure, but also especially for the use of artificial intelligence. And the very last thought to leave you with, and then I stop, is basically a topic that I wish we talked about today, but I don't feel really equipped to have a good conversation on that. But a topic that I think is going to play a very big role as we move forward. And the topic is data journalism. I'm not sure how many of you have been paying attention, but data journalism is an area, is a field that is really blooming across the world. There are global organizations. Some of you might have seen Tom Cordoso, a Global Mail researcher. He's a crime and justice reporter, also calls himself a data journalist. He came up with an article in October 2020. It's about bias in Canadian prison systems. He ended up putting his hands on 185 megabytes of data. He wanted to start looking at juries and wanted to look at bias in jury selection. He couldn't get the data. Later on, he found out that there is actually an incredible amount of data built around sentencing. And he looked at the risk. And at the end, as he applied again and again, it took some time, but he obtained an incredible amount of data from Correction Services Canada. And he did a study. Now, it's not the topic of the study, which is very important. And he found out a number of, I strongly recommend for you, if you haven't seen it, to look into it. Why is it important for me at this stage? The data journalism is one area that brings together logical use of data, but also brings the curiosity of the journalist, if you will, to look and dig deeper in areas or topics that have often left a little bit kind of dormant, if you will. So their courage and curiosity plays a factor. And then maybe the third element of that beauty, let's say, if you will, I'm trying to convince you to become data journalist champions. And the third element is a little bit maybe what, Vicky, you were telling me at the beginning, is that you don't just apply some smarts onto the data and find out and tell a good solid story, but also you need to bring in artistic and data visualization strength to tell this story. Because data journalists, after all, they don't publish in boring academic journals. They have to make those findings intelligible to the public. And these days, if you look at New York Times, even Global Mail actually right now as well, they are working on this. A lot of data visualization. And what lies behind that is this data journalist's mind, if you will. So I hope those data journalists start using all those data that I have just described and others. But I invite you to pay a little bit of attention to this as a field, a little bit maybe in competition, in my opinion, if they do it right, with the academic researchers, maybe. So with that, I owe you a huge thanks for having listened to me almost 40 minutes. And I'll stop at that.
Well, thank you, Umit. Before we get to questions, Umit, you're frozen actually, just on the video, not on the audio.
Okay. Let me see if I can do anything on it, but I'm unable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, the sound is fine.
Okay. Yeah, there might be some technical difficulties. Let's see if it fixes itself.
Okay. So we're now going to move on to questions. And in order to make this simple, I'm going to ask people to raise their hands in the participant sidebar. And then we'll call on different people to ask their questions. So if you have questions, please put your hand up in the just raise hand. Dan, did you have a question?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the very interesting talk. It was very informative. I've been doing a lot of work on the GDPR lately. And, given proposed changes to the Privacy Act and the PIPEDA, how should we think about data minimization in this context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So especially with consent, and we're thinking about data accountability and limited use, I was just curious how you would think about that with all this connecting data together. Thanks.
Yeah. Very important question. I kind of hinted at it a little bit, in the conversation. This is when we sit down at tables, especially when you start immediately talking about, data linkages, the identifying of the person, making sure that confidentiality, privacy is protected. So we do have ongoing conversations in the department. To tell you the truth, I'm going to be very honest. We rely on StatScan's care and attention in this domain when we work within the StatScan environment. And when we do our own open data portal or statistical reporting to custom-based statistical reporting, we always pay attention to small cell suppression, randomized anonymization of the data. We definitely take that very seriously. But at the same time, what you're getting at as the kind of, if you will, the big data starts sitting in, and sometimes if the care is not there enough, and human error is always possible, we may lose, we may end up making decisions without really being aware of the downstream privacy impacts of those decisions. Trying to create
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Laura.
Thanks, Vicki. Umit, I wanted to, first off, thank you for telling us all about the data. And I obviously am very much interested in all types of data and ways that we can work together to understand more about what's going on in society. And one of the things you mentioned that particularly caught my ear was that you've been working with academics to distribute surveys to the people that you have on your roles. And I would actually just like to know more about that, because we have many surveys coming up this year. And I think this is a fascinating idea. Our interest, of course, is how immigrants integrate into Canadian society and think about government and things like that. So I don't know if there's a follow-up name or something. I can follow up with you later, but I think it's an awesome way of utilizing data in multiple ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, honest to God, if one wishes that, there is a huge capacity out there, and we do this on a more ongoing fashion, like turn it into a program. There isn't, but there is definitely a strong possibility. What we do is we assess, given limited capacity, policy relevance of the project, and we work together. If there are no other ways of conducting that study, and we also look at that, then we become part of the solution, if you will. So we have a very small data partnerships unit. They are the ones who work, who interface with the researcher, external researcher. And we look at whether that particular population that you're after, do we have a good quality data in terms of their, let's say, addresses, email addresses, or postal addresses. In the, of course, and the crafting and drafting of the message is very important. It's not, it can't be intrusive, but it leaves the decision to the person to participate or not to participate. So we build all those. And we have done some very successful examples. It's quite a bit labor intensive at our end, but again, I go back to the conversation that I'm trying to have here. If we are serious about the end value, that will be created and its contribution to the kind of bigger puzzle that I try to describe, then it's almost like a crime not to do it. I mean, let me put it that way, not to have something in place like this, because what is the other alternative is not to conduct it or conduct a less robust study, while all the means to conduct a much better one, more valid and reliable, is there, but we are unable to mobilize the resources. Like, it doesn't make sense not to do it. So yes, if you have those type of projects, you could definitely approach me, and I will put you in touch with our team members. Always keep in mind, it may take a little bit of a time, like it's not a really like next week type of thing. But yes, please.
Are there other questions? Okay, I'm going to ask a question then. Umit, I'm wondering about education data. So the school boards have tons of data on education, on performance, the testing that they do. Is there any thought about linking some of those data sets?
Yeah. There is, I mean, we are very interested in that as well. At the post-secondary level, there have been some work, you know that. I think university data, and there has been some work under a project, short project, I think with StatsCan, and the international students, especially or immigrant 1.5 generation and their work. Some people have looked at it. K-12 is very important for us as well. Historically, K-12 has not attracted much attention because we knew, or we thought that we know, that immigrant children actually do well in terms of school completion compared to third plus generation. However, in the last so many years, as refugee populations and their children arrive, greater portion of population less than younger than 18 years old, there is a need to keep the pulse, if you will, of their school success or not, if you will, closer, especially the Syrian refugee population, you know better than I do, Vicky, gave a lot of signals of worry, risk, surfacing from anecdotal, or not anecdotal, but qualitative and type of studies. So in terms of that data, we have one study here with, we are working with the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership to develop their data capacity, creating a data set of data assets, if you will, that will cover the Ottawa geography. If it works, we will kind of export it to other LIP area. So in the context of that, we are discussing through the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership with the school district as well. And not only K-12, but also some housing information and other type of data sets that municipalities also have. So we're trying to kind of create, see if it's possible, a small geography, especially around LIPS, a data asset capacity, and of course after that maybe in partnership with universities and analytical capacity as well, to give more power, if you will, to the LIPS. And I know you care about the LIPS a lot yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, for example, the effect of COVID and whether, I mean, we can speculate that it's going to impact immigrant children more than other children, but it would be great to be doing some analyses of that, just for example.
Yeah.
Stefan, you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Kiziltan, thank you very much for the informative session. I have a couple of questions. So the first one is in terms of approaches. So what approaches are you using to analyze the data? What I mean is, are you looking at more internal versus external approaches? So are you building your own algorithms, use of artificial intelligence? Are you using third parties to analyze information for you? I'm just curious how that happens in the context of the federal government.
Yeah. So very good question. So let's start from the artificial intelligence side. So we have a strong advanced analytics team, not in my branch, but in our operations sector. As you would guess, they are very much interested in looking for efficiencies in processing files and also using advanced analytics to have better risk analysis, risk-based treatment of files. So that group is an internal group, and they work in that fashion. We have also an in-house research team, about 15 to 20 members of that team, and also an evaluation team, a separate evaluation team, not in my shop, but in a different branch, who continues to use this kind of a set of data that I've described, both internally available and the data that is also in StatsCan. We have a joint partnership with StatsCan around analytical studies. Every year, about 4 or 5 of them, co-authored studies that we do. And then, of course, the third one is basically trying to promote these data assets, including the ones in the provinces, so that the academia, and I'm going to be very blunt here, especially the students, the younger generation, if you will, to get them excited about these assets. I personally, it's my bias, but I believe that young generations have kind of a little more courage to ask tougher questions than the ones that we ask internally in public service, with some more critical theoretical approaches. They can bring a little more scrutiny, if you will, to policy files. And if we can get them mobilized in the use of these type of data assets, and it takes a couple of, not generations, maybe cohorts, maybe for people to realize that, oh yes, of course I can work with IMDb, no problem, right? And we are also ready. I spoke to Yoko's class yesterday, a sociology class. It takes partnerships with academia. Like, in my opinion, maybe this is too grandiose to think this way, but in my opinion, there needs to be series of courses, maybe working with synthetic files, or really taking entire class and put them in the RDCs and getting them used to do. These are, of course, complex data sets. I don't claim expertise in all of them, but it takes cohorts to show to each other that it's not that complicated. So that's our business model, if you will. I think that was your question, Stefan. Sorry. So our business model has got all these different dimensions to draw value out of all this effort.
That's right. In terms of yeah, I understand that it's a multi-layered enterprise. In terms of perceiving data as assets, are you looking at data monetization? I know that in the context of government, that is virtually impossible. Like, it's more for the private sector. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that with the advancement of technologies, there will be different ways to explore data and to use data.
Yeah. Very good question again. In open government and open data portal, every year they do all kinds of data fests, or I forgot now what they call. They do promote the use of especially open data to generate business, or as you said, monetizing possibilities.
Yes.
I do recall a few years ago a group of youth using immigration data actually by looking at destination and anticipating where immigrant populations will be landing, and looking at I think in Calgary, in Calgary, I believe, or in Alberta, trying to bring that data to shed light onto winter clothing, or sales of skis or skates. They did a small app by using, I know this is a very small and a cursory description of a mini project, but I fully agree with you. As the data becomes more and more available, it's the imagination and, I guess, ingenuity of the entrepreneur set of eyes, if you will, that will land on that data to draw that type of a value out of it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Any more hands up? Alex.
Yeah, I have a question about the merger, the linkage of iCare data with IMDb. You said it's a pilot and it's kind of happening, and including at Western potentially. Yeah, my question is, what's the extent of iCare data besides whether people do access settlement services? Like how long, like what's the kind of lifespan of iCare data? Is there like a follow-up with immigrants who use services, I don't know, up till they stop or something? Like, if you could just kind of corroborate on the scope of iCare data there.
Yeah, I think, if later on, if you're more interested, we can send you, more, richer description as well. But think of the settlement services. Settlement services, you may already be familiar. We spend about $900 million a year, almost $1 billion a year. Some of it, a big portion goes to Quebec. The rest of it goes to the rest of Canada. So iCare collects data not from Quebec, but the rest of Canada. We call it ROC. So it captures the following. As the eligible immigrant newcomer arrives, there are at least, I think right now, 6 different modules of settlement services. Starts with the needs assessment. In fact, settlement services start not in Canada, they start even overseas, right? There is pre-arrival settlement services. Needs services are done there as well. That data is captured in iCare as well. But basically the continuum is needs assessment, language levels assessment, language training. When we say training, the first level, let's say they do a test, you have the test captured. 6 months later, the person arrives and takes another class. The level of that class is captured. So you can do a progression analysis, right? Even inside iCare without linking it to anywhere else. Whether the person is receiving employment training, are they employed while they are receiving, or are they employed afterwards if they are still in the program? There are a myriad of data fields, and it captures the person as long as they are benefiting from the settlement services, right? And the eligibility stops, as you may know, when you become a citizen. So in that time frame. Now, of course, not everybody accesses the settlement services. But of course, also it has all the, I didn't maybe describe that in my presentation, but it doesn't only have the settlement services information, but it also has, because we link that with the sociodemographic information. So you have all the information about the individual from immigration category to gender, to education level, to at landing, right? So in that sense, it's richer than just the settlement services. Did you take it or did you not take it? So as it links with the IMDb, it brings all that information. And now you also have the individual who has received services and all of their earnings, social assistance, employment insurance, and all that in that linked data set. Is that making sense? I hope.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, any final questions?
One more. Just
Okay.
curious, like I know that IMDb, and I am working with IMDb data right now in our local RDC center. It is microdata and all. I'm just curious if there are any plans to bring IMDb data in some shape or form available through Open Government Portal.
Not really, not in that shape. Like it
No,
can't.
sure
I
not.
don't think.
Maybe
Yeah.
some sort of aggregation, maybe
Yes.
some insightful.
Yes. Okay. So on that one, little above the microdata, like in terms of aggregate shape, I'm not sure, for instance, Alex, if you looked at the portal, StatScan portal or not. StatScan has a portal. In that portal, actually just created a couple of years ago, jointly, again, we worked many years on that. That portal allows you to do aggregate analysis on IMDb directly. It's a public portal, actually, and lets you visualize as well all type of median income to, you name it, by immigration category. It gives you enough dimensions, if you will. So what comes almost closest to what you're asking, I would say, is the StatScan site. The other thing that comes close to what you're asking could be a window like the one that maybe a little bit what Laura, like a concierge service, if you will. If you have a certain project and you don't have time and energy or certain limitations to enter RDC to work, if a particular table or tables or maybe even pivot tables type of information can serve your needs, then we can facilitate and provide that to you. So we can get that ourselves and provide that information to you. Is that making sense? So I'm trying to find ways around RDC for maybe quicker access to a very simple solution that might already fit the purpose for your puzzle, if you will.
Yeah. Like I mean, for currently for my specific purposes, I do need to be in RDC, but it's
Yes.
good to Yeah, that there is
For
stats
sure.
kind of the
Yeah.
portal that you can just get in and get some quick,
Yes.
some quick summary information. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any final questions? Felicia.
Yes, so I just want to say that this section has been very informative, and that I want to find out if IRCC has a way of assessing the efficiency of decisions that are made by officers through the GCMS.
What a wonderful question. I wonder, like, if I were nasty, I would say define efficiency, I guess. If you mean, I'm not sure if you mean, well, maybe I should ask you, not to be nasty, but what do you mean by efficiency?
What I mean is the credibility of the decisions that are made.
Okay, so integrity, in a sense, is the decision right? Is there, for instance, bias in the decision, right?
Exactly.
You ask very tough questions. So, of course, just like we talk about, algorithmic bias when you run an AI, when the individuals work on decisions, I mean, I can't think of anybody who would come and say, oh, no, there is no bias in anything, in the decisions we make. There is bias in every decision that we make every day. So has IRCC looked systematically in the decisions, in the processing decisions? The operations sector always reviews decisions. They do studies to ensure that if there are gaps, they would provide better guidance. But I am not personally aware of any systematic study that looks at that particular phenomena that you're raising. But in itself, is it an important topic? Absolutely, because it is about the lives of many people. And if there are some systematic biases built in, one needs to identify them and then address them in the best way possible. And I cannot agree with you more. But raise this question, write some articles on that, and maybe poke around to raise consciousness about that, and hopefully maybe there will be some studies. I'm not passing the buck. Huh? I'm just totally agreeing with you.
Thank you. So any other questions for today?
It's not a question per se, but I just wanted to find out if you have internship opportunities, because I'm currently in the Masters of Arts in Research for Policy and Evaluation program, and I think IRCC would be a very good organization to take my intern with. So if that opportunity exists, who do I contact, and how do I get into it?
Okay. Yes, we do. I mean, in the past we have done it. Now, I mean, when I used to run the research shop and our research branch, I don't want to speak for them, but definitely right now, as we currently speak, in fact, even on IRCC website, I believe there are recruitment advertisements for hiring students or internships, different type of angles that they advertise. I wish I knew that I could share right now in the sidebar, but I don't have it readily available. One way, if this is the program that Vicky, you were telling me about, okay, so I think Vicky probably will be able to build that bridge with IRCC to create that, at least identify the door as to where to knock on. And it could be a good fit both in the research shop, for instance, somebody like you, or, I mean, in IRCC, or it could be in one of the line branches like immigration branch or refugees branch, because they also need research power. So it's not just research for research sake, but a research mind and talent working very closely with a policy file. It could be temporary foreign workers. It could be, I don't know, maybe a health file. It all depends on the strength that the person brings in. But that would be a great match in terms of win-win solution.
Thanks, Umit. And I will put Felicia in touch with the right people. So if we don't have any more questions, maybe we should end here. I'm sure Umit would be willing to receive questions later by email, I hope.
Yeah, no problem.
If people have further questions. But at this point, I just want to really thank you, Umit, for what I thought was a really informative presentation, especially for this audience of faculty and students who work with the type of issues you're discussing. And some of them work with these issues and work with these data sets on a daily basis. So it's great to hear what you have to say. And we'll have to have you back again in a couple of years to hear about all the updates, because it sounds like things are moving very quickly. So thank you again. Thanks for everything.
Thank you very much to all of you. Honest, I hope that I added a little bit of a value, and I hope that it wasn't so much immigration specific. I know I talked about immigration data sets, but I'm hoping that you're reading between the lines. Actually, there's a bigger story here than just the immigration files. And I think all as Canadians, we all have a big stake in good data, informing solid public policy programs. And in that respect, I'm hoping that maybe that subtext, I hope it came across and it wasn't just a kind of talk about immigration. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.